The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a living, breathing beast that enveloped Elvis Presley every single night. It surged and receded, a wave of adoration and demand. And tonight, like so many nights before, it threatened to drown him. He stood baked, the sweat already beading on his forehead, despite the cool blast of the air conditioning. The lights were blinding on stage, the screams piercing even through the thick curtains. He was 27 in the prime of his career, a global phenomenon. Elvis the Pelvis had matured into Elvis the King, a polished, powerful performer, freshly returned from his army service. The public loved him more than ever. But behind the sequined suits and the famous grin, Elvis felt a strange, persistent ache, a loneliness that the millions of screaming fans could never fill. He had everything: money, fame, beautiful homes, fast cars, the adoration of the world. But lately it felt less like a blessing and more like a gilded cage. Every move was watched, every word dissected. The demands were relentless. New songs, new movies, new tours. Colonel, his manager, was a constant presence, pushing, negotiating, always looking for the next big deal. There was no quiet, no peace. Not really. Tonight, after a grueling 3-hour performance in a cavernous arena, Elvis felt particularly drained. His throat was raw. His body thrummed with a combination of adrenaline and exhaustion. He flashed his famous smile, waved, bowed, blew kisses. But inside he was empty. He longed for something real, something simple. A moment where he wasn't Elvis Presley, but just Elvis. A boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who loved music and his mama. He was whisked from the stage through a blur of security and shouting assistants into the waiting limousine. Tinted windows were a blessing cutting off the world, but they also amplified the feeling of being trapped. He sank into the plush leather seat, loosening his tie, closing his eyes. The voices of his entourage buzzed around him. Talk of box office numbers, next week's schedule, fan mail. It was a language he understood, but one he was growing weary of. Elvis, you are magnificent tonight. Someone gushed. He nodded, a tight smile on his lips. Thanks, fellas. He stared out the window, watching the city lights blur by. They were on their way to the hotel, another lavish suite, another room where he would feel just as alone as he did now. He thought about Graceland, his beautiful home, but even there the solitude often felt heavy, broken only by the presence who were always there, but rarely saw the man beneath the legend. They saw the king, too, in their own way. A sudden, impulsive thought sparked in his mind. He couldn't face another hotel room. He couldn't face another night of being the untouchable icon. He needed to breathe. Pull over, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Everyone in the limo looked at him, surprised. Sir, we're almost at the hotel. Just pull over, he repeated, opening his eyes and meeting the driver's gaze in the rearview mirror. I need to stretch my legs. I'll meet you there. The driver hesitated, then pulled to the side of the highway, a quiet stretch of road on the outskirts of the city. As soon as the car stopped, Elvis opened the door himself. Stepping out into the cool night air, he took a deep, shuddering breath. The air smelled of damp earth and distant trees, not stale cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. Colonel, I'll be fine. Just a minute, he said, seeing the worry on his manager's face. He waved them off, turned his back to the idling limousine, and started walking away from the glow of the city lights towards the darkness of the open road. He just walked, not knowing where he was going, only knowing he had to get away, even if just for a little while, from the overwhelming weight of being Elvis Presley. He needed to find a moment of peace, a breath of air that wasn't filtered through the lens of fame. The solitude was immediate, almost shocking. The hum of the limousine faded as it reluctantly pulled away, leaving him alone under a sky dusted with stars. He wasn't sure how long he walked, or how far, but with every step, a tiny part of the tension in his shoulders eased. He was just a man on a road, not the king. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't terrify him. It felt like liberation. He knew his security would be frantic, the colonel would be furious. But he didn't care, not tonight. Tonight he was just Elvis, a lost soul looking for a quiet place to land. And up ahead, barely visible through the darkness, he saw a faint, flickering light, a sign of something, anything beyond the endless highway. He walked towards it, a flicker of hope stirring in his tired heart. The light grew stronger as Elvis walked, resolving itself into the soft glow of a neon sign. It was small, old, and seemed to hum with a gentle, forgotten energy. Mama Belle's Diner, it read, the letters crooked and faded. It stood alone on the side of a deserted country road, far from any major town. The building itself was a humble wooden structure, painted a cheerful but chipped yellow, with a small porch and 2 wooden steps leading up to the front door. Pushed open the screen door, and a tiny bell above it jingled softly. The aroma that greeted him was a warm, inviting mix of coffee, bacon, and something sweet, like apple pie. It was a smell that instantly transported him back to his childhood, to simpler times in Tupelo before the world discovered him. The diner was empty, save for one person, an elderly woman with a kindly face, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was wiping down the counter with slow, deliberate movements. She wore a faded apron over a simple print dress. Her eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses were a startling shade of blue, warm and knowing. She looked up as he entered, her movements unhurried. There was no gasp, no wide-eyed stare of recognition, no sudden rush. She simply observed him with a gentle curiosity. Elvis, still dressed in his performance suit, though he'd shed the jacket and loosened his tie, must have looked wildly out of place. He was used to immediate recognition. The shock and awe her calm, almost indifferent gaze was a profound relief. "Well, hello there, stranger," she said, her voice a low, melodic drawl like molasses. "Lost your way, did you?" Elvis managed a small, genuine smile. "Something like that, ma'am?" He gestured vaguely behind him. "Car trouble?" It wasn't exactly a lie. His car was the entire world he'd just escaped from. She nodded, as if a broken-down limousine on a deserted road was an everyday occurrence. "Pity, but you found yourself a good spot for a bite. Sit anywhere you like, honey. Coffee's fresh." He chose a booth by the window, the bynum worn smooth with years of use. He sank into the seat, feeling the familiar tension in his shoulders begin to melt away. He watched her as she moved, fetching a mug and a coffee pot. There was a quiet dignity in her movements, a sense of being completely at peace with her small world. She placed the steaming mug in front of him, then the coffee pot. "You look like you could use that," she said, her blue eyes twinkling. "Long night, you could say that," he replied, taking a grateful sip. The coffee was strong and black, exactly what he needed. "Kitchen's still open for a bit if you're hungry," she offered, leaning against the counter. "Got some fresh biscuits, and I can whip up some eggs or pie." Always got pie. Elvis hadn't realized how hungry he was. "Biscuits and eggs sound mighty fine, ma'am. And a slice of that pie, if you don't mind." "Don't mind at all," she said, already turning towards the kitchen, her movements surprisingly spry for her age. "Name's Belle, by the way. Folks round here call me Mama Belle." "Elvis," he said, and for a moment he braced himself. But she simply nodded her back to him as she opened the refrigerator. She didn't miss a beat. She didn't react. It was as if she'd heard the name 1,000 times before, and it held no special meaning for her. He watched her, a sense of unreality washing over him. Was it possible? And simply choose not to acknowledge it either way. It was a profound gift, to be seen simply as Elvis, a man in need of coffee and a meal, not a global icon, was something he hadn't experienced in years. It was a quiet revolution for his soul. He leaned back, breathing in the comforting smells, listening to the gentle sizzle of bacon from the kitchen. The silence was golden, broken only by the clinking of pots and pans and the soft hum of the refrigerator. No flashing cameras, no demanding voices, no screaming fans, just the quiet rhythm of a simple life unfolding before him. He felt an unfamiliar calm settle over him, a deep welcome peace that he hadn't known. He was missing until now. It was like finding an oasis in the middle of a desert. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt himself truly relax. Mama Belle returned from the kitchen a few minutes later carrying a plate piled high with fluffy scrambled eggs, crisp bacon, and 2 golden brown biscuits. A small dish of homemade peach jam sat beside them. The food looked and smelled incredible miles away from the bland room service meals he usually ate. She placed the plate in front of him. "There you go, honey, eat up." Elvis picked up a fork, a grateful smile on his face. Cut into a biscuit, slattered it with jam, and took a bite. It was warm, buttery, and dissolved in his mouth. Pure comfort. He hadn't realized how much he missed real home-cooked food. "This is wonderful, Mama Belle," he said, his voice softer than usual. She beamed, her blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just simple fare, but good for the soul, I always say." She went back to wiping the counter, humming a soft, tuneless melody under her breath. He ate slowly, savoring each bite. He felt himself unwinding layer by layer. The frantic energy of the stage, the suffocating pressure of his fame, it all began to recede, replaced by a quiet contentment. He glanced around the diner. It was small, with only 5 booths and a handful of stools at the counter. The walls were adorned with old photographs of what looked like family faded newspaper clippings about local events, and a hand-stitched sampler that read, "Bless this mess." Everything was worn but meticulously clean, clearly cared for with love. He finished his plate, feeling a satisfying fullness in his stomach. Mama Belle brought over a slice of apple pie, still warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting slowly on top. "My grandson picked these apples last fall," she said, placing it before him. "Best apples you ever did taste." The pie was as good as promised, the apples, tart and sweet, the crust flaky. It was food made with care, with history, with a love for the ingredients and the people who would eat them. As he ate, Mama Belle continued her quiet work, occasionally glancing at him, not with curiosity, but with a gentle watchfulness. He realized she wasn't waiting for him to reveal himself. She was simply being present. "You're a long way from home, aren't you, Elvis?" she finally said, her voice still calm, almost conversational. He froze for a fraction of a second, his fork halfway to his mouth. So she did know. The relief he'd felt earlier quickly gave way to a familiar defensiveness. Here it comes, he thought. The questions, the autographs, the plea for a favor, but she just smiled faintly, reading his expression. "Oh, honey, I've seen you on the television a time or two, heard your songs on the radio. Ain't nobody in this country who hasn't. You got a voice, boy. A real gift." She paused, then continued. Her gaze direct, but kind. "But out here in my diner, you ain't nothing but a young man who looks mighty tired and hungry. And every tired, hungry soul deserves a good meal and a moment's peace." Her words hit him with the force of a gentle wave, washing away his defensiveness, replacing it with a profound sense of gratitude. She wasn't starstruck. She wasn't seeking anything from him. She saw him, not the image. She saw Elvis, the weary young man, not Elvis Presley, the king. "Thank you, Mama Belle," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat. That means a lot." "Means you got a good heart," she replied, shrugging slightly. "Now, are you going to finish that pie before it all melts?" He laughed, a genuine, unforced laugh that felt foreign and wonderful in his own ears. He ate the rest of the pie, feeling lighter than he had in months. When he finally pushed the plate away, he looked at Mama Belle. "What do I owe you?" he asked, reaching for his wallet. She waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing for a lost traveler tonight, honey. Sometimes a kind word and a moment of quiet company is all the payment a person needs." Elvis felt a lump form in his throat. He had more money than he could ever spend, but this offer of a free meal, freely given, felt more valuable than any million-dollar contract. It was an act of pure, unadulterated generosity. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had given him something without wanting anything in return. "No, Mama Belle, I insist," he said, pulling out a bill. She shook her head gently. "Nonsense. You look like you got enough burdens on your shoulders. Let an old woman take one small one off for you tonight." She gestured around the empty diner. "It's late. You're welcome to stay in the spare room out back. If you need a proper rest, nobody much stops by at this hour." Elvis was stunned. A free meal. A free room. From a stranger who knew exactly who he was, yet treated him like a son. The thought of a quiet, unbothered night's sleep was almost overwhelmingly appealing. He imagined the quiet, the simple bed, no phone calls, no demands. "Are you sure?" he asked, a hopeful tremor in his voice. "Sure as the sun's gonna rise," she said, her smile gentle. "Go on, get some rest. You look like you need it more than anyone I've seen in a long time." He looked at her truly, looked at her, and saw a deep wisdom in her eyes, a kindness that seemed to flow effortlessly. He knew instinctively that this was a moment he wouldn't forget. This quiet diner, this unassuming woman, had offered him something infinitely more precious than any amount of fame or fortune. They had offered him peace. The small room Mama Belle offered was simple, clean, and surprisingly cozy. A narrow bed, a wooden dresser, and a single window looking out onto a small, overgrown garden. There was no television, no phone, no distractions, just quiet. Elvis changed out of his suit into the spare set of comfortable clothes he kept in his travel bag for emergencies. He lay on the bed, feeling the soft cotton sheets against his skin. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He woke to the smell of coffee and bacon again, this time mingled with the scent of dew, kissed earth. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting stripes across the wooden floor. He stretched, feeling his muscles ache, but it was a good ache, not the tense, nervous tremor he usually carried. He felt rested, truly rested for the first time in years. He emerged from the room, feeling a lightness in his step. Mama Belle was already in the diner, wiping down the counter just as she had been the night before. But now, the morning light filled the space, making it feel even more welcoming. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, her voice warm. "Thought you'd sleep all day. Coffee's on and I just made some fresh pancakes." He grinned, feeling a genuine lightness in his chest. "Morning, Mama Belle. That was the best sleep I've had in a long time." She poured him a mug of coffee. "Good. A body needs its rest, especially a young man who carries the world on his shoulders." Elvis sat at the counter this time, watching her move around the kitchen, flipping pancakes on a griddle. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. She turned, her blue eyes meeting his. "Know what, honey?" "About the world on my shoulders," he clarified. She chuckled softly. "Oh, I've seen a lot of folks pass through this diner in my 70-something years, Elvis. Some carrying visible burdens, some carrying them deep inside. You got that look in your eyes like you're trying to keep too many plates spinning at once." She brought him a stack of golden pancakes, a pat of butter melting on top, and a small pitcher of real maple syrup. "Sometimes," she said, leaning against the counter, "the heaviest weights are the ones people give you. And sometimes they're the ones you put on yourself." He drizzled syrup over his pancakes, listening to her. Her words weren't critical or judgmental, just observant. "It's hard, Mama Belle," he confessed, his voice low. "Being me. Everyone wants something. Everyone has an opinion. They love you, but they also want to own a piece of you. And sometimes you just feel like you're breaking apart." She nodded slowly. "I reckon so. Folks see the shine, but they don't see the grind. They see the crown, but they don't see the thorns. It's a lonely place up on that pedestal." "It is," he agreed, surprised at how easy it was to talk to her, to reveal this vulnerability he kept hidden from everyone else. "But that's why it's important to remember who you are underneath all that glitter." She continued, her gaze unwavering. "You're not the fame, Elvis. You're not the songs or the movies or the millions of dollars. Those things are just things. They come and go. He swallowed, thinking about her words. He'd often felt his identity was completely intertwined with his public persona, without the king, who was Elvis. "So, who am I?" he asked, almost a whisper. Mama Belle smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "You're the boy who loved to sing in church. You're the kind heart that just paid a visit to an old woman's diner and listened to her ramble. That's who you are, Elvis. That's the real you. And that's the part you gotta hold on to, tight, no matter what the world tries to make you be." Her words resonated deep within him, touching a part of his soul that had been starved for validation. It wasn't about being famous, it was about being true to himself, about remembering the simple core of who he was before the whirlwind started. He finished his pancakes, feeling a new kind of hunger satisfied, a hunger for understanding, for genuine connection. He spent the rest of the morning talking with Mama Belle, not about his life of fame, but about her life in this small, forgotten corner of the world. She told him stories about her late husband, about raising her children, about the changing seasons, and the simple joys of her garden. He listened, truly listened, and found a deep well of peace in her stories. He felt a connection he hadn't realized, he craved so desperately. He felt seen not as a celebrity, but as a person. And in that simple recognition there was profound healing. After breakfast, Elvis felt a strange reluctance to leave. The quiet rhythm of Mama Belle's life was a balm to his frazzled nerves. He saw the piles of fresh laundry waiting to be folded, a small stack of dishes in the sink, and a general air of gentle maintenance around the diner. "Mama Belle," he said, standing up from the counter, "you've been mighty kind. Let me help you out today. I can help with whatever you need." He wasn't sure what he could do. His hands were usually only used for holding a microphone or signing autographs. She looked at him surprised, then a soft smile spread across her face. "Well, now that's a sweet offer, honey. I won't say no to an extra pair of hands. My old bones ain't what they used to be." So for the rest of the morning and into the afternoon, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, became a temporary helper at Mama Belle's diner. He started by washing dishes, carefully scrubbing plates and glasses, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. The warm, soapy water and the simple repetition of the task were surprisingly meditative. Mama Belle stood beside him drying, and they talked quietly about the weather, about the best way to get a grease stain out of an apron, about anything and everything but his celebrity. Then she asked if he wouldn't mind carrying some heavy bags of flour and sugar from the storage shed out back into the kitchen. He hefted the sacks easily, enjoying the feel of honest work. He helped her sweep the floor, dust the shelves, and even wipe down the worn wooden booths. He polished the old jukebox in the corner, imagining the tunes it used to play. Around noon, a couple of local farmers stopped by for lunch. They exchanged pleasantries with Mama Belle, glanced curiously at Elvis, still unrecognized or at least unremarked upon, and settled into their usual booths. Elvis poured their coffee, refilled their water glasses, and even took their orders. He watched Mama Belle cook, marveled at her efficiency and calm in the small kitchen. He felt a genuine satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the roar of the crowd or the thrill of a sold-out show, but a deeper, quieter joy. The joy of being useful, of contributing to something simple and good. Later in the afternoon, Mama Belle mentioned her old fence needed mending. "My grandson usually handles it, but he's away at college." "I can do it," Elvis offered instantly. He found a hammer and some nails in her shed, and though his technique might have been a bit rusty, he worked steadily, repairing loose planks and hammering in new ones. The sun warmed his back, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass from a neighbor's yard. As he worked, a couple of children from a nearby farm wandered over, drawn by the sound of hammering. They were shy at first, then began watching him with wide, innocent eyes. "What are you building, mister?" a little girl with pigtails asked. "Just fixing a fence," he said, smiling. He knelt down to their level, keeps the chickens in. He spent a few minutes talking to them, asking about their pets and their games. He even showed them how to properly hammer a nail, letting them hold the hammer with his hand, guiding theirs. Their laughter was pure and uninhibited, a sound he rarely heard anymore. They didn't know he was Elvis Presley. They just saw a tall, kind man who was good with a hammer and patient with kids. When the fence was mended and the children had skipped off, Elvis stood back, admiring his handiwork. It wasn't perfect, but it was sturdy. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment. It was so different from the abstract satisfaction of recording a hit song or filming a movie. This was tangible, real. And immediate, he went back inside the diner, dusty but content. "You're a good worker, Elvis," she said, her eyes twinkling. "A real keeper." He flushed slightly, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Just doing my part, Mama Belle, more than your part," she corrected gently. "You got a good heart, son, a kind spirit. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Her words were simple, but they landed deep within him. All his life he'd been told he was talented, misak, handsome but kind, good-hearted. Those were labels he rarely heard, especially not from those around him in the industry. Her recognition of his innate goodness, the part of him that felt most true, was a gift in itself. It reminded him of his roots, of the values his mother had instilled in him. He realized that this quiet, unassuming place, and this wise, gentle woman, were showing him a path back to himself. Path paved not with gold, but with humility, kindness, and honest connection. The afternoon deepened, and the diner remained quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the gentle murmur of Elvis and Mama Belle's conversation. He felt no urge to check his watch, no anxiety about what the Colonel might be doing, no pull back to his celebrity life. For these precious hours, he was simply Elvis, the man who helped fix a fence and wash dishes. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows through the diner's window, Mama Belle brought out a worn wooden box. She settled into the booth opposite him, her hands gnarled with age resting on the box. "You know, Elvis," she began, her voice soft, "life's a funny thing. It throws all sorts of tests at you. Some are big, like losing someone you love. Some are small, like a broken fence." She looked at him, her blue eyes deep and thoughtful. "But the hardest ones are often the ones that try to change who you are inside." Elvis listened, captivated. He knew she was speaking of his fame, of the pressures that sought to mold him into something other than himself. "I've seen it happen to folks," she continued. "They get a bit of success, a bit of attention, and they start to believe the stories people tell about them. They forget the quiet person they were before. They forget their roots." She opened the wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were various small, seemingly ordinary objects. A dried wildflower, a smooth river stone, a tiny, intricately carved wooden bird. Each piece seemed to hold a story. "My husband Thomas. He was a simple man," she said, picking up the small wooden bird. "He worked hard, loved his family, and found joy in the little things. He carved this bird for me years and years ago, just because he saw a bluebird singing outside our window one morning, and he said it reminded him of how my spirit soared." She smiled, a wistful, loving expression. "He always told me, 'Belle, you're like a mighty oak tree. Your branches might reach high, but your strength comes from your roots deep in the earth.' He meant no matter how much you grow, how far you go, you gotta remember where you came from, what made you, you. You've got branches reaching to the sky. Elvis, the whole world sees them. But sometimes when the wind blows too hard, you gotta feel for those roots. You gotta remember the soil that made you strong from the box." It was cool and weighty in her palm. "This here's stone. I found it down by the creek the day Thomas passed. I was heartbroken, felt like my world was crumbling. But I held this stone and I felt its quiet strength. It had been shaped by time, by the flow of water, by all the storms. It had weathered, but aware." She reached across the table and placed the stone in his hand. It felt cool and smooth against his skin, comforting. "You carry a lot of noise with you, Elvis," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Cheers, the lights, the expectations, it's enough to make a man forget his own name. Sometimes this stone, it's a reminder. a reminder that underneath all the noise, all the flash, there's a quiet strength in you, there's a solid core. You are good, you are kind, you are loved, not just for what you do, but for who you are. Elvis looked down at the stone in his palm, then back at Mama Belle. Her words weren't just spoken, they were imbued with a lifetime of wisdom, of experience, of deep, unwavering faith in the inherent goodness of people. She wasn't praising his talent. She was affirming his soul. She was giving everything. The part that cost nothing to gain and everything to lose. Tears welled in Elvis's eyes. He didn't try to stop them. He just sat there holding the smooth stone, feeling the weight of it, and the immeasurable weight of her words. He had been given countless gifts in his life, cars, jewelry, awards, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever felt as precious, as profound, or as deeply needed as this simple, smooth stone and the truth it represented. This was the gift, not just the stone, but the understanding, the unconditional acceptance, the unwavering belief in his inner worth, untainted by the glare of fame. Elvis sat there, the cool, smooth stone in his palm, feeling the profound weight of Mama Belle's words. It wasn't just a rock. It was a physical anchor for a truth he had desperately needed to hear. He looked up at her, his eyes brimming. Mama Belle. His voice was thick with emotion, unsure how to express the depth of his gratitude. She reached across the table, her hand gently covering his that held the stone. Her touch was warm, comforting. No need for fancy words. Honey, I just see a good soul, a little lost perhaps, in all the bright lights, and sometimes all a good soul needs is a little reminder of what truly matters. She leaned back, her gaze steady. You see, folks out there, they love the showman. They love the voice, the moves, the charisma. And that's fine. That's your gift to the world. But that ain't all of you, not by a long shot. She paused, then continued, her voice soft but firm. The real gift, Elvis, the one that makes you, you is the love you carry in your heart, the kindness you showed by helping an old woman like me, the respect you give to folks who ain't got a dime to their name. That's the real treasure. It cost you nothing to offer, and it cost me nothing to receive. He thought of all the times he'd felt used, all the times people had tried to manipulate him, all the times he doubted his own worth beyond his ability to perform. Mama Belle wasn't interested in his fame. She was interested in his humanity. She was telling him that the true measure of him wasn't in his record sales, but in his character. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different, you hear me? She insisted, her gaze unwavering. Don't let the world make you hard or cynical, or forget the simple boy who just wanted to sing. That boy is still in there, and he's worth more than all the gold in Fort Knox. Her words were a balm to his soul, a powerful antidote to years of pressure and isolation. He realized the gift wasn't the stone itself, but the unconditional acceptance, the profound understanding, and the unwavering affirmation of his inherent goodness that Mama Belle had just bestowed upon him. It was the feeling of being truly seen, truly valued, not for what he could do or what he had, but for who he was at his core. This was something he couldn't buy, couldn't earn, couldn't demand. It was given freely, purely, without expectation. It was the love of a mother, the wisdom of an elder, and the kindness of a stranger, all wrapped into one moment. He closed his hand around the smooth riverstone, feeling its solidity, its quiet strength. It was a tangible reminder of this exact moment of Mama Belle's words, of the feeling of peace that had settled over him in this unassuming diner. Thank you, Mama Belle, he managed, his voice still hoarse. Thank you for everything, she smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. You're a good boy, Elvis. Remember that always. That's the most important thing you'll ever know about yourself. He spent a little longer with her, feeling the last vestiges of his celebrity persona fall away. He was just Elvis, a man having a quiet conversation with a wise, kind woman. They talked about her garden, about her family, about the little details of life that made up her world. He found himself listening with a deeper attention than he normally gave to anything. Every word from her seemed to hold a simple, profound truth. As the dusk deepened outside, he knew he couldn't stay forever. His absence would surely be causing a minor panic by now. But he felt a lightness in his heart that hadn't been there when he arrived. He had found something here, something invaluable and intangible, something he could carry with him no matter where he went. It was the gift of his own identity, affirmed and cherished by someone who saw beyond the veil of fame. It was the most precious gift he would ever receive because it was not given to Elvis Presley, the king, but to Elvis the man, and it cost absolutely nothing. It was pure, unadulterated love and acceptance. As the stars began to pepper the night sky, Elvis knew he had to face the world he had temporarily escaped. His manager, the colonel, would be in a frenzy, but the thought no longer filled him with dread. Something fundamental had shifted inside him. He stood up from the booth, the smooth river stone still clutched in his hand. "Mama Belle," he began, searching for the right words. "I don't know how to thank you for all of this." He gestured around the quiet diner. Then to his heart she rose, her eyes warm and understanding. "No need for thanks, Elvis. Just carry what you found here with you. That's payment enough." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a thick wad of cash. "Please, Mama Belle," he insisted, trying to press it into her hand. "For the food, for the room, for your kindness." She gently but firmly pushed his hand back. "Nonsense, honey. I told you it's all on the house. What I gave you, you can't put a price on, and what you gave me today, your company and your trust, that's worth more than all the money in the world." He looked at her, truly understanding. She lived by a different currency, a currency of kindness, of human connection, of simple grace. He realized that offering her money would diminish the purity of the gift she had given him. Instead, he did something he rarely did outside of performance. He reached out and gently took her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. "You're an angel, Mama Belle," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled, her blue eyes twinkling. "Just an old woman who loves to cook and listen? Now you best get on. The world's probably worried sick about its king." He managed a small, sad smile. He didn't want to leave. This small diner, this quiet woman had become a haven, a sanctuary for his soul. But he knew he couldn't stay. His life, for better or worse, was out there. He stepped onto the small porch, then turned back to look at her, standing framed in the doorway of her diner, bathed in the soft glow of the faded neon sign. "She looks Mama Belle," he said. "God bless you, Elvis," she replied, her voice carrying softly on the night air. "And remember what I told you. You're a good boy." He turned and began to walk down the deserted road, back towards where he vaguely remembered his limousine had dropped him off. The silence of the night was different now. It wasn't empty, it was filled with the echoes of Mama Belle's words, with the memory of her kindness, with the solid, comforting feel of the smooth river stone in his hand. He walked for a while, the stone clutched tight. After a bit, he saw the familiar shape of his limousine, parked further down the road, its lights off, waiting. As he approached the driver, security and even the colonel rushed out, their faces a mixture of relief and barely contained fury. "Elvis, where in heaven's name have you been? We've been frantic," the colonel exclaimed, his voice sharp with frustration. "Just needed a walk," Colonel Elvis said, his voice calm, surprisingly firm. He didn't offer details. He wouldn't share Mama Belle with them. This was his secret, his private sanctuary. They drove back to the hotel, the usual chatter filling the car, but Elvis barely registered it. He looked out the window, not at the city lights, but at the dark, distant outline of the countryside where Mama Belle's diner lay. He felt the stone in his pocket, a quiet anchor in the storm of his life. He was still Elvis Presley, the king, with all the demands and pressures that came with it, but now he carried something new within him, a sense of grounding, a renewed connection to the fundamental goodness he believed lay at his core. He had been reminded of his roots, of the simple truth of his own being separate from the dazzling, demanding persona. And that reminder, that quiet, invaluable gift he knew he would carry with him, always. It was a breath of fresh air in a suffocating world, a light in the deepest shadows. Years rolled by, turning into decades, and the world of Elvis Presley grew even more vast, more demanding, more complex. He achieved even greater heights of fame, conquered new arenas, starred in more movies. But with each triumph came new pressures, new expectations, and the weight of being the king grew heavier. There were the endless tours, the grueling recording sessions, the pressure to always be on, to be the ultimate showman. There were the periods of loneliness, the personal struggles, the growing isolation that fame often brought. The world celebrated his image, but few truly saw the man. During these times when the noise became unbearable, when he felt lost or overwhelmed, Elvis would instinctively reach into his pocket. His fingers would close around the smooth river stone Mama Belle had given him. It was always there, a constant companion. He'd hold it, feeling its cool solidity, and he'd close his eyes. In his mind, he'd return to that quiet diner, to the smell of coffee and pie, to Mama Belle's calm, knowing eyes. He'd hear her voice soft and clear. "You're a good boy, Elvis. Remember that's who you are, no matter what the world tells you." Sometimes he'd sit by himself at Graceland, long after everyone else had gone to bed, and just hold the stone. He'd remember the afternoon of simplicity, washing dishes, mending the fence, talking to the children. Those moments, free from the glare of celebrity, were his secret reservoir of peace. They reminded him that his worth wasn't tied to record sales or movie grosses. It was tied to the core of himself, the kind boy from Tupelo, who simply loved to sing and had a good heart. There were moments, too, when the temptation to give in to the excesses of his life was strong. Constant parties, the endless temptations, the advice from those who sought to flatter and enable rather than guide. But then he'd remember Mama Belle's wisdom. The heaviest weights are often the ones you put on yourself. And he'd try with varying degrees of success to pull back, to find that quiet, solid core. She had spoken of. The stone became a symbol, not of wealth, not of power, but of inner strength, of groundedness. It was a reminder to stay true to himself, to remember his roots, to guard the kindness and authenticity that Mama Belle had recognized in him. He never spoke of Mama Belle or the diner to anyone. It was the one part of his life that remained untouched by the commercial machine, untainted by the demands of his public persona. It was his secret sanctuary, his private wellspring of peace. Even as his health declined in later years, as the pressures mounted and the world became a blur of medication and performances, the stone remained. He kept it by his bedside, sometimes clutched in his hand as he slept. It was a tangible connection to a time when he had felt truly seen, truly accepted, truly at peace. The gift of Mama Belle's unwavering belief in his goodness, given freely and without expectation, was the most profound and lasting treasure he ever received. It didn't cost a cent, but it provided him with a lifeline through the tumultuous waters of fame. It was the constant whisper in his ear, reminding him of who he truly was beyond the bright lights and the screaming crowds. It was the quiet truth that sustained him, a profound comfort that no amount of fame or fortune could ever buy. And it helped him in his darkest moments to remember the simple good boy he still was inside. In the quiet hours, when the world outside Graceland fell silent and the house was still, Elvis would often find himself reaching for the smooth river stone. It lay on his bedside table, a constant, unassuming presence. He'd pick it up, feeling its familiar weight and texture, and in those moments the decades of fame, the roar of the crowds, the endless demands would fade away. He'd close his eyes, and he would be back in Mama Belle's diner. He'd smell the coffee and pie, hear her gentle melodic voice, see the kindly crinkles around her blue eyes. He'd relive the afternoon of simple work, the feeling of honest dirt on his hands, the pure laughter of the children he'd helped with the fence. He'd remember the profound peace of being seen not as a king but as Elvis, a good boy from Tupelo. Mama Belle had given him so many things that day, all of them priceless, yet costing nothing. She had given him a safe haven from the storm of his life. She had given him a moment of true normalcy, a taste of a life where he wasn't constantly under the microscope. But above all, she had given him the gift of unconditional acceptance. She had looked past the dazzling facade and seen the heart of the man beneath. "You're a good boy, Elvis. Remember that. That's who you are, no matter what the world tells you." Her words echoed in his mind clear as the day she spoke them. This wasn't a material gift like a car or a diamond ring which could be lost or broken or lose its luster. This was a gift of the spirit, a truth so fundamental it became a part of his very being. It was the knowledge that his worth was intrinsic, not dependent on his performance or his public image. It was the understanding that deep beneath the layers of fame and expectation there was a core of goodness, a quiet strength that could weather any storm. In the chaotic, often lonely world of superstardom, this gift became his anchor. It was the touchstone he returned to whenever he felt adrift, whenever the pressures threatened to overwhelm him, whenever the glitter seemed to blind him to his own soul. It reminded him that while the world might try to define him by his fame, he had a deeper, truer identity that no one could take away. He never went back to Mama Belle's diner. He knew instinctively that some moments were meant to be held pristine in memory, untouched by the complexities of his later life. He didn't want to risk shattering the perfect, pure memory of that day, but he carried her and her wisdom with him, always. On August 16th, 1977, as his extraordinary life drew to a close, it's not hard to imagine that in his final moments, a part of Elvis Presley found solace in that ultimate free gift. Perhaps, as he drifted, he remembered the quiet diner, the kindly face of Mama Belle, and the profound, simple truth she had given him. That at his core, he was just Elvis, a good boy, loved for who he was. The smooth river stone, worn from years of being held, of providing comfort, of acting as a silent guardian of his true self, remained. It was a humble object, costing nothing. But to Elvis Presley, it represented the most precious, enduring gift he ever received, the gift of self-acceptance, of profound human connection, and the unwavering assurance of his own inherent goodness. It was the one treasure that truly enriched his soul, and he treasured it above all others for all his days.